The lights inside the Good Morning America studio gleamed like polished glass, casting a flawless glow across the set. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. The cameras hummed, their red recording lights blinking like watchful eyes. Millions of viewers tuned in across the country, expecting a gentle segment about Taylor Swift's new album, a cheerful moment of morning television to pair with their coffee. Taylor sat across from Robin Roberts, her posture elegant, her smile practiced yet strained, the kind of smile celebrities wear when they are both gracious and guarded. She tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear, her fingers trembling slightly against the table. Robin leaned forward, her voice smooth, professional, but edged with a weight that hinted this was no ordinary interview. "You fought hard for your masters," Robin began, her tone deceptively soft. "But some critics argue this fight was never about artists' rights. It was about control, about Taylor Swift maintaining power over Taylor Swift." The words cut sharper than any compliment could. Taylor blinked, her composure flickering. She inhaled slowly, as though steadying herself before a storm. "When a young artist signs a contract at 15, she said carefully, they don't realize they're handing away their life's work. This isn't about control, it's about fairness." Robin's eyes did not waver. "Fairness to whom?" she asked. "Because millions of artists struggle in silence. Why should your story matter more than theirs?" The audience fell silent. Even the technicians in the background stopped shuffling papers. The cheerful rhythm of the morning show had dissolved. What remained was something rawer, more dangerous. Taylor shifted in her chair, crossing her legs, gripping her note cards with white-knuckled tension. "My story is visible," she said, her voice low but fierce. "If I don't speak, the exploitation continues. And if I do speak, maybe other artists won't have to endure the same cycle." Robin leaned back slightly, studying her like a judge weighing testimony. The pause stretched, uncomfortable, filling the studio with a tension that made the cameras feel less like tools of entertainment and more like instruments of interrogation. Taylor's fans were watching, her critics were watching, and Taylor herself knew the stakes. One wrong word, and the empire she had built, not just with music, but with myth, could crack in front of millions. "Some say," Robin continued, her voice now edged with steel, "that your fight for ownership was less about protecting others and more about rewriting your own image, shaping yourself as a rebel instead of the polished pop star you once were. What do you say to that?" Taylor's breath hitched, her lips parting as though she might answer. But in that half-second of silence, the power shifted. For the first time, Taylor wasn't controlling the narrative. Robin was. The audience could sense it. This was no promotional puff piece. It was a confrontation, a trial disguised as an interview. Taylor straightened, her chin lifting, defiance flashing in her eyes. "I've been underestimated my whole career," she said, her voice tightening. "And every time someone tried to define me, I fought back with music, with action, with truth. If that makes me a rebel, then maybe I was always meant to be one." The silence that followed was heavier than applause. Robin's expression remained unreadable, her hands folded neatly on the desk, her gaze steady. And in that fragile silence, the interview had transformed. The bright studio lights felt like interrogation lamps. The applause cues were gone. The audience no longer breathed easy. A star and a journalist now faced each other like opposing counsel, their words serving as evidence, their tones as verdict in che. The cameras zoomed closer, catching the flicker of frustration in Taylor's eyes, the unwavering stillness of Robin's stare. This was supposed to be safe, predictable. But instead, morning television had just become a battlefield. The silence in the studio was deceptive, calm on the surface, but alive with crackling tension. Taylor sat straighter now, shoulders squared, though her grip on the note cards betrayed the pressure mounting inside her. Robin leaned slightly forward, her voice calm, deliberate, but honed with the precision of someone who knew exactly where she was leading the conversation. "You've spoken about fairness," Robin said, eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. "But let's be specific. In 2019, when your masters were sold to Scooter Braun's company, you painted yourself as blindsided. Some people close to the industry have said otherwise, that you were fully aware, that negotiations were offered, and that what you wanted wasn't ownership for the sake of artists. It was ownership for Taylor Swift. Taylor inhaled sharply, a flash of indignation across her face. She forced a smile, but her jawline tightened, betraying the emotion beneath. I learned about the sale the same way the world did, on the internet. And to suggest I had any fair opportunity in those negotiations is simply not true. Her voice carried a subtle tremor, not of weakness, but of fury restrained. Robin didn't flinch. She pressed again, each word slower, more deliberate. Yet reports surfaced that you were offered a chance to earn back each album, one for every new album delivered. Why reject that? Why not play by the rules that countless artists have had to accept? The phrasing hung heavy. Rules, accept, countless artists. It was more than a question. It was an accusation of entitlement. Taylor leaned forward, eyes blazing, the veneer of composure cracking under the weight of implication. Because those weren't rules, she snapped. That was extortion. Imagine telling a painter they can have their art back in a canvas at a time if they agree to paint for the same patron who stole their gallery. That isn't business. It's theft wrapped in fine print. The air grew thick, the studio audience shifting uneasily in their seats. Robin's gaze remained sharp, her expression controlled, as though she were less an interviewer and more a prosecutor cross-examining a witness. You call it theft, Robin countered, but Scooter Braun's team insists it was business as usual, that it was a deal any artist in your position should have expected. Taylor's lips curled in disdain. Her voice dropped, low and steady, cutting through the quiet like a blade. Business as usual is the problem. Business as usual is why 15-year-olds sign away their futures, why women in this industry get treated as commodities instead of creators. If my case looks bigger, it's only because I'm shining a light on a system designed to keep people silent. Her words carried fire, but Robin matched her intensity with cool restraint. And yet, she said, tilting her head slightly, you're still here. Still one of the most powerful women in music, still able to record, perform, and profit. Some argue your platform makes it difficult to see you as a victim at all. The challenge landed with a thud. Taylor shifted uncomfortably, her eyes narrowing, her voice sharpened in response. Power doesn't erase injustice. If anything, it makes it harder, because people like you, her hand lifted slightly, pointing without realizing it, will always say I don't deserve to speak, that I haven't suffered enough to call something unfair. Gasps rippled faintly through the audience. The accusation was bold. Robin Roberts, one of the most respected journalists in America, now cast as part of the silencing machine. Robin didn't react outwardly, but her fingers tapped once against the desk, a small, subtle reminder that she still commanded the pace. Taylor, Robin said, her tone unshaken, you've built your image around being underestimated, around fighting battles. Isn't there a risk that this fight, this masters debate, is less about principle and more about maintaining that underdog story, the one that keeps your fans invested? The words struck with precision, drawing blood without raising volume. Taylor's eyes widened briefly before narrowing again. She leaned closer, her voice carrying both defiance and hurt. Do you think I wanted to fight this battle? Do you think I asked for my life's work to be taken? No. But when it happened, I refused to be silent. And if that fits some underdog narrative you think I need, then maybe the problem isn't my story. Maybe it's the way people like to reduce women to narratives they can consume. The studio held its breath. Every camera zoomed in closer, capturing the glisten in Taylor's eyes, the stiffness in her shoulders, the faint quiver of her lip. Robin's calm persistence clashed with Taylor's fiery resistance, creating a spectacle that transcended the interview format entirely. In the control room, producers whispered frantically into headsets, debating whether to cut to commercial, but none dared. This was television lightning, the kind that sears itself into cultural memory. Robin's voice, measured and steady, broke the silence again. So what you're saying is that your struggle represents something bigger than yourself? Taylor nodded sharply, her voice steadying. Exactly. This isn't about me. This is about every artist who's been told their work isn't theirs, who's been silenced, who's been traded like property. If my platform forces people to look at this, then maybe something will finally change. Robin let the answer linger, her expression inscrutable, her eyes locked on Taylor's as though weighing the truthfulness of every syllable. The cameras closed in on their faces, two women locked in an unspoken duel, one demanding accountability, the other demanding recognition of injustice. The trap had been set, and Taylor had walked directly into it. The morning show no longer belonged to network producers. It belonged to the raw collision of power, truth, and perception unfolding live before a nation. The exchange over ownership had left Taylor visibly rattled, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the edge of the desk. The studio lights seemed hotter now, sharper, as if magnifying every flicker of emotion across her face. Robin, steady as stone, shifted her papers but never broke eye contact. The audience could sense it. The conversation was about to move from music to something far more combustible. Robin's voice softened just slightly, but the words carried the sting of memory. Let's talk about another silence, one not about contracts, but about politics. In 2016, during the Trump-Clinton election, you stayed quiet. Many of your fans begged you to speak out, to use your platform, but you didn't. And for years, critics called you complicit, even opportunistic. Why? The question sliced through the studio air like a razor. Taylor's expression faltered, her breath catching. She had prepared for questions about her music, her masters, her artistry. But politics, her greatest vulnerability, was a wound not yet scarred. She swallowed hard before answering. I was 26. I was terrified. The world already criticized everything I said, everything I wore, everything I did. And when it came to politics, She paused, shaking her head, her eyes glistening as though she were pulling words from a place she had buried. I was told that if I spoke out, half my audience would disappear, that my career would collapse overnight, so I stayed quiet, and I regret that silence more than almost anything else in my career. Her voice wavered. The audience leaned in, but Robin was merciless. Regret is easy in hindsight, but isn't it true that you only spoke when it became safe? In 2018, you endorsed candidates in Tennessee, but only after the political climate had shifted, after it became acceptable, even profitable, for celebrities to take a stand. How do you respond to the accusation that your activism was more convenience than conviction? The words hit like a gavel. Taylor stiffened, her lips parting in disbelief. Her hands trembled on the table, but her voice, when it came, carried a sharp edge. Safe? Nothing about it was safe. When I spoke out in 2018, I received death threats. I was told my concerts would be targeted. My family was threatened. I was told I was destroying my career. If that's what you call safe, then you don't know what it felt like to live inside that silence. Her voice cracked on the last word, raw and unguarded. The audience gasped softly, the room teetering between sympathy and skepticism. Robin did not relent. Her gaze was steady, unblinking. But the timing is what people question. Why now, they asked. Why not then? For someone who has built a career on authenticity, doesn't waiting until the tide turned look like strategy, not bravery? Taylor leaned forward, her eyes flashing, her voice trembling but fierce. Because I was drowning. I had paparazzi outside my home, critics dissecting my body, my relationships, my art. I felt like speaking on politics would break me entirely. I chose survival. Maybe that was cowardice. But in 2018, I realized silence was no longer an option. I was watching hate win. I couldn't stay silent while people I love were threatened, while communities were under attack. I knew I'd pay for it, and I did, but I couldn't live with myself if I didn't speak. Her words hung in the air, quivering with emotion. Some in the audience nodded. Softly, others crossed their arms, unconvinced. Robin pressed again, her voice calm but unyielding. So you admit, you chose silence until it became unbearable. Isn't that the very definition of opportunism? Taylor's body went rigid, her nostrils flaring. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that trembled with rage. You call it opportunism. I call it survival. You don't know what it's like to have millions waiting for you to misstep, to weaponize your words against you. You don't know what it's like to carry that weight as a woman in this industry. And yet, when I finally used my voice, I was told it was too late, too little, too convenient. I can't win. No matter what I do, someone will say it's wrong. The studio fell silent again, the tension suffocating. Robin sat back, folding her hands, letting the words echo. She had struck the rawest nerve, and Taylor's fury, though justified, was also dangerous. The cameras caught every detail, the sheen of sweat forming at her temple, the tightness in her jaw, the way her foot tapped nervously beneath the table. This was not the polished Taylor Swift fans knew. This was a woman cornered, lashing out, stripped of her carefully crafted narrative. From the control room, producers whispered urgently, debating whether to pull back, but the director shook his head. This was history in the making. Taylor exhaled sharply, regaining a sliver of control. Her voice steadied, though her eyes still burned. If people want to call me late to the fight, fine, but at least I joined the fight. At least I spoke when it mattered most. I can't change 2016, but I can change what I do now, and I'll never be silent again. For the first time, Robin allowed the faintest flicker of expression, something unreadable, a mix of respect and scrutiny. She didn't reply immediately. She let Taylor's declaration linger, suspended in the thick air of the studio. The clash over politics was no longer about dates or endorsements. It had become a battle over authenticity itself, whether Taylor's silence had been cowardice or whether her eventual voice had been redemption. The audience sat frozen, each viewer at home forming their own verdict. Some saw bravery, others saw calculation, but no one could look away. And in that moment, as the cameras closed in on her face, Taylor knew the past she had tried to bury had just been reopened for the world to judge. The studio lights bore down on the set like an interrogation chamber. Every bulb seemed to pulse with the tension in the air, and though the cameras were poised and ready, the room itself felt locked in a silence that carried weight. Robin Roberts leaned forward in her chair, her polished professionalism masking the storm brewing beneath her measured tone. The segment had already gone off script, the easy charm of a morning show replaced by an atmosphere that felt closer to a cross-examination than a conversation. "Taylor," Robin began, her voice calm but edged, "there are critics who say your activism only comes when it's convenient, when it doesn't risk your brand or alienate your base. How do you answer them?" The question hung there, deliberate and sharp, slicing through the air like a blade. Taylor Swift shifted slightly, her posture still upright, her gaze fixed, but her jaw tightened as if she had just been dared to speak her truth. She let the silence linger a beat too long, drawing the audience into the gravity of the moment. "You mean the people who want me to risk everything, just to prove I care?" Taylor's voice carried steel now, controlled but trembling with restrained fire. "Where were those voices when I was told to stay quiet, to smile, to sing, to never speak? They weren't protecting me then, they were protecting the system that profits off my silence." A ripple went through the crew, a subtle intake of breath from those off camera. Robin, unflinching, pressed on. "But don't you think stepping in only when it's safe?" Taylor cut her off, her tone firm and rising. "Safe? Do you think it's safe to be a woman in this industry, standing up against billion-dollar corporations, against politicians who'd rather erase me than hear me? Safety has never been on the table. What I do is survival." Robin's brow furrowed, her polished mask cracking for just a moment as the intensity of Taylor's words landed. The control she prided herself on was slipping against the raw conviction radiating across from her. The clash of philosophies was no longer abstract. It had become a duel in real time. Robin's measured skepticism against Taylor's defiant truth. The atmosphere shifted from interview to battle, and every word now carried the weight of an accusation or a defense. The cameras rolled on, capturing the spectacle, but what electrified the room was not for television alone. It was the unspoken recognition that this wasn't just a pop star defending her choices, nor a journalist probing for clarity. It was the collision of two different Americas, one demanding constant justification, the other refusing to bow under its gaze. Taylor leaned forward, her voice low but cutting, a declaration meant for everyone watching beyond the studio walls. "I'm not here to perform your idea of courage, Robin. I'm here to live mine." The silence that followed was louder than any applause could have been. The silence after Taylor's words lingered like smoke. The crew exchanged glances, unsure if they had just witnessed a collapse or a breakthrough. Robin Roberts, always a master of composure, shifted in her seat, her polished poise momentarily rattled. She had walked into this interview believing she held the reins, but now the ground beneath her was tilting. The studio felt heavier, the lights brighter, the air thick with an unspoken awareness. Something irreversible had just happened. Robin cleared her throat, her voice steady but slower now, the certainty in her tone frayed. "Taylor, do you realize what you've just admitted? Millions are watching. Every word will be dissected, every sentence held against you." Taylor didn't flinch. Her eyes burned with a quiet defiance, her voice softer but more resolute than ever. "Then let them. If my words scare people more than the silence I used to keep, maybe that tells us everything about where the real danger lies." The control had shifted. No longer was Taylor the guest being scrutinized. Robin had become the one on trial, her role as the arbiter of truth suddenly called into question. Behind the cameras, the producers whispered in urgent tones. Should they cut to break? Should they reel Taylor back in, smooth over the cracks forming live on air? But the audience at home wasn't reaching for the remote. They were leaning in, glued to the rawness unfolding before them. Robin leaned back, her practiced calm faltering. "This isn't the narrative your team promised us," she said quietly, almost to herself, but the microphone caught it. It slipped through like a confession. Taylor's lips curled into the faintest trace of a smile, not of triumph, but of recognition. "That's because I stopped letting other people write my story." The moment hung suspended in the air, charged and irreversible. The interview had ceased to be an exchange. It had transformed into a reckoning. Robin had been the one wielding questions as weapons, but now she was left disarmed, facing a subject who refused to be contained. The cameras kept rolling, but what they captured no longer belonged to network scripting or corporate polish. It was something raw, unscripted, alive. And though neither woman said it, both knew. After today, nothing about their reputations, or the world watching them, would remain the same. The energy inside the studio had shifted into something volatile, like static before a storm. Viewers at home could sense it too. The chat feeds on streaming platforms were exploding, hashtags already forming in real time. What began as a primetime interview had turned into a cultural fault line. Robin Roberts tried to regain control, her hands folded tightly on the desk, knuckles paling under the pressure. "Taylor," she said, voice low, deliberate, "you understand this could cost you everything. Your endorsements, your label relationships, even your standing with the networks. Is that really the hill you want to die on?" Taylor's gaze didn't waver. Her breathing was steady, but her words came out like sharp glass. "If the cost of honesty is everything I've built, then maybe it was never really mine to begin with. Maybe it was just borrowed, until I found the courage to claim it." Gasps echoed softly from the crew. The tension had become unbearable, yet magnetic. Every camera angle framed Taylor not as the fragile artist Robin's questions had implied, but as a woman reclaiming her narrative under fire. Robin leaned forward, trying to soften, to pivot back to safe ground, but her words slipped into the air like weak lifeboats in a hurricane. "Taylor, the public isn't always forgiving. They don't want messy. They want the perfect version of you." Taylor's reply cut deeper than anything yet. "Then maybe it's time the public learned that perfection is the lie that kept me quiet, and silence almost broke me." The lights hummed overhead, but they felt like spotlights in a courtroom now, illuminating every crack, every truth too long hidden. Robin, for the first time, looked shaken, not as a journalist, but as a woman realizing she was part of the very machinery Taylor was calling out. No one said cut. No one dared. Because in that instant, the interview had transcended entertainment. It had become testy, money, and millions of witnesses were watching. The silence after Taylor's last words hung like a heavy curtain, thick and suffocating. For a moment, even the hum of cameras felt muted, as if the entire tessant